He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Not since the boardroom coup he'd narrowly avoided. Not since his assistant quietly reminded him, again, that his daughter's birthday had passed 3 days ago. Again, a soft chime broke the quiet. The elevator doors slid open, and Clara stepped in, holding 2 steaming mugs. She didn't speak at first. She never did when she sensed he was drowning in thoughts too heavy to name. Instead, she placed 1 mug on the marble counter and leaned against the frame of the kitchen doorway, watching him with those calm, knowing eyes. "You look like you haven't blinked in hours," she said gently. Elias exhaled, a sound more like a sigh than breath. "I've been staring at spreadsheets so long. I think I've forgotten what trees look like." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you remembered." He turned to her then, really looked at her. Not as his confidant, not as the woman society whispered about over champagne flutes at galas, but as someone who had stayed quietly, steadily, even when he offered nothing in return but exhaustion and silence. "I rented a place," he said suddenly, voice rough. "Upstate, old estate. No Wi-Fi, no staff, no meetings. Just quiet." Clara raised an eyebrow, but there was warmth in it. "And you want me to go with you?" "I don't want to be alone," he admitted. The words raw, unexpected even to himself. "Not this time." She studied him for a long moment. Then, softly, "You're running away again, aren't you?" "No," he said, and this time he almost believed it. "I'm trying to find something I lost." Clara walked over and handed him the mug. The scent of chamomile rose between them, simple, human. "Then let's go find it," she said. "But promise me one thing. Anything. Don't pretend this is just a weekend getaway. If you're going back to the countryside, you're going back to yourself. And that man might not be easy to face." Elias looked down into his tea, his throat tight. He thought of winding country roads, of dew on grass at dawn, of a life he'd once walked away from without looking back. He didn't tell her he'd chosen that particular estate because it was far from everything, and everyone, he'd ever hurt. He didn't know, not yet, that Havenbrook wasn't just any estate. It was hers, Isadora's. His past waited for him there. Not in photographs or letters, but in the very soil, in the creak of the porch swing, in the piano that still held the ghost of her favorite Chopin nocturne. But for now, all he felt was relief, the kind that comes before the storm. "All right?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Let's go." And as the city lights faded behind them the next morning, Elias closed his eyes in the back seat of the car, feeling something he hadn't in years. Hope, fragile as a seedling pushing through cracked earth. He didn't know it would soon be tested by roots deeper than he'd ever imagined. Okay, now act as a narrator and storyteller. Develop the story without marking each topic as you develop it. Tell me about topic 2 with dialogue as if I were the spectator, always remembering to develop it with a lot of emotion, with many feelings, so that the narrative structure uses a linear timeline so that the spectator feels what the character is feeling. In English, with 6,000 characters, January 12, 2026, 2:06 p.m., the morning sun spilled golden over the Hudson Valley as the black sedan wound its way down a narrow lane flanked by ancient oaks. Clara sat beside Elias, her hands folded in her lap, watching the world blur past. Fields stitched with wildflowers, stone fences draped in ivy, the distant glint of a river catching the light like a promise. She hadn't packed much, just a small suitcase, a book of poetry, and the quiet certainty that this trip meant more than escape. Elias hadn't spoken since they left the city. His fingers tapped restlessly against the armrest, eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for something just beyond sight. Clara knew that look. It was the same one he wore the night his father died, the night he'd stood alone in a hospital hallway, too numb to cry, too proud to ask for comfort. She turned to him now, voice soft but steady. "You're nervous." He didn't deny it. "I haven't been somewhere this still in years. It feels like walking into a room where everyone's holding their breath." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe they're waiting for you to speak first." He glanced at her then, really looked at her, not as a companion of convenience, but as someone who saw him even when he tried to disappear. "Why did you say yes?" he asked suddenly. You could have stayed in the city, gone to that gallery opening, had dinner with friends who actually laugh at your jokes. Clara's smile deepened, tinged with melancholy. Because someone has to remind you that you're still human, Elias. And right now, you're doing a very good impression of a ghost. He looked away, but not before she caught the flicker in his eyes. Gratitude wrapped in shame. The car slowed as they approached a wrought iron gate, weathered but elegant, crowned with the initials W.H. Whitmore Haven. Beyond it, a long gravel drive curved toward a grand but unpretentious manor house, its white clapboard walls softened by time and climbing roses. Smoke curled from the chimney. A swing swayed gently on the porch, moved by a breeze that carried the scent of lavender and damp earth. It's beautiful, Clara whispered. Elias said nothing. His knuckles had gone white around the door handle. Inside, the air was cool and fragrant, beeswax, old books, and the faintest trace of wood smoke. Sunlight streamed through leaded windows, painting warm rectangles on wide plank floors. A piano stood in the corner of the parlor, its lid closed like a secret. Clara set her bag down and walked to the window, gazing out at the rolling hills. It feels lived in, loved. Elias stood frozen in the foyer, staring at a framed photograph on the hall table. A younger Isadora, laughing in a sun hat, kneeling in a garden, dirt on her knees. He hadn't seen that photo in over a decade. His chest tightened. Did you know the owners? Clara asked, turning back. No, he lied, voice tight. Just saw the listing. Seemed private. But the truth pressed against his ribs like a stone. He'd chosen this place because it was anonymous, remote, because he thought no one would know him here. He never imagined the past had roots this deep. A door creaked open down the hall. Footsteps approached, light, deliberate. Then a woman appeared in the doorway. Mid-40s, silver threading her dark hair, eyes sharp with intelligence and caution. She wore a linen apron dusted with flour, a wooden spoon in hand. Mr. Van Doren, she said, voice calm but edged with something unreadable. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Elias stiffened. I apologize. We came early. The woman's gaze flickered to Clara, then back to him. A bead of silence stretched between them, thick with history he couldn't name. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, she said finally, extending a hand. Isadora's sister. The name hit him like a gust of winter wind. Isadora. Clara stepped forward, offering a warm smile. I'm Clara. Thank you so much for having us. Eleanor nodded politely, but her eyes never left Elias. Of course, though I must say, it's rather ironic, isn't it, that you'd choose this house to disappear into? Elias swallowed. I didn't know. Didn't you? Her tone wasn't cruel, just weary, as if she'd watched this story unfold once too often. Well, the guest rooms are ready. Dinner is at 7. Try not to wander into the east wing. It's still being restored. She turned to leave, then paused. Without looking back, she added, and Elias? Some ghosts don't stay buried just because you stop visiting their graves. The moment she disappeared down the hall, Clara turned to him, concern etched into every line of her face. Who is Isadora? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the piano, ran a finger along its polished surface, and whispered, My wife, for 10 years. Clara's breath caught. You never told me you were married. I didn't tell anyone, he said bitterly. Not really. We divorced quietly, cleanly, or so I thought. He finally met her eyes, and for the first time, Clara saw not the tycoon, not the stoic strategist, but a man standing on the edge of a memory he couldn't outrun. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves like pages turning in a book long forgotten. And inside Havenbrook, the past began to stir. Not with anger, but with the quiet insistence of truth. Clara reached out not to touch him, but to offer presence. Then maybe, she said softly, it's time you stopped running from her and from yourself. Isadora. He murmured more to himself than to Clara. She wasn't just my wife. She was everything I failed to appreciate in time. Clara watched him silently, noticing how his shoulders, always erect with the rigidity of power, now seemed to bend under an invisible weight. She asked no more questions. She didn't need to. In his eyes lay a whole story. 10 years of unspoken love, of absences disguised as success, of promises broken without even realizing it. "We met here," Elias continued, his voice hoarse, as if the words had been trapped for years. "In this garden." She was planting lavender. "I came to sign an agreement with her father about some neighboring land. I never imagined I would end up married to the daughter of the man I considered a rival." She paused, and a sad smile appeared on her lips. She was brilliant, passionate. She spoke of the land as if it had a soul. She said that every tree had a memory. I talked to her about mergers, stock prices, impossible schedules. I thought I gave her reassurance. But she just wanted me to be there. Clara took a step closer without invading, just accompanying. "Why did they separate?" He lowered his gaze. "Because one day I left, and I never really came back. Even though I was still sleeping in the same bed, I wasn't there anymore. I was in meetings, in airports, in numbers that meant nothing. And one day, she told me, 'Elias, I don't recognize your eyes anymore.' The following month, we signed the papers. No shouting, no scenes, just silence. A creak in the hallway made them turn around. Eleanor was there again, this time with a tray of steaming tea. Her expression was gentler, but her eyes were still watchful. 'My sister didn't hate you, Elias,' she said, placing the tray on a low table. 'That's what hurts the most. She loved you so much that she preferred to let you go rather than see you become a shadow of your former self.' Elias paled. 'Is she talking about me?' Eleanor let out a short, joyless laugh. 'Never by name, but every time he sees a storm approaching from the west, he says, 'There comes someone who forgot to close the windows,' and he always checks yours." Elias's heart clenched as if someone had squeezed it tightly. He looked toward the east window, where the curtains were gently billowing. "Is he here?" Eleanor stared at him. "No, he lives in Vermont. He works in native species conservation. He has a greenhouse full of wild orchids that no one else can grow. He says fragile flowers deserve more patience than men." Clara held her breath. There was pain in those words. Yes, but also a strange tenderness. As if Isadora, even in her absence, had sown compassion instead of resentment. "So, why did you agree to let him come?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Eleanor sighed, crossing her arms. "Because my mother is sick, and though I'd never say it, Dad's been asking about him. Not the Tycoon. The man who once helped repair the old mill when no one else wanted to get their hands dirty." He approached Elias, and for the first time his tone softened. "Maybe Havenbrook isn't just a refuge for you. Maybe it's an opportunity. For you, for her, for all of us." Before Elias could answer, thunder rumbled overhead. The lights flickered. Then, with a sharp crack, they went out completely. Darkness enveloped them. "The storm!" Eleanor exclaimed, moving quickly. "The road will flood in less than an hour. No one will be able to get out or in." At that moment, the landline phone on the wall rang. An old-fashioned, metallic sound, out of place in the modern world. Eleanor picked it up with a trembling hand. "Yes, Isadora?" The name floated in the air like a flame in the darkness. Elias remained motionless, his heart pounding in his ribs. "Yes, he's here," Eleanor said, looking him straight in the eye. "Yes, he's still here." And at that moment, as the rain began to lash against the windows with increasing fury, Elias knew that he would not be able to escape this time. Elias stood frozen near the hearth, his face half-lit by the flickering flames, eyes wide with something between dread and disbelief. "She's coming." Clara watched him closely, her arms wrapped around herself not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. She'd seen powerful men crumble under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't about money or reputation. This was about a soul standing at the edge of its own reckoning. Eleanor set the phone back on its cradle with deliberate calm. though her fingers trembled slightly. "She's driving through the storm," she said quietly. "Says the roads are already flooding near Mill Creek, but she won't turn back." Elias swallowed hard. "Why? Why now?" "Because Mom took a turn this afternoon," Eleanor replied, her voice cracking just once before she steadied it. "Fever spiked. Confused. Kept calling for Isadora. And for you." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the room, through Elias's chest. "She called for me." He hadn't heard that name, his name, from Isadora's mother in over 8 years. Not since the divorce dinner, when the old woman had looked at him with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "You were like a son to us." Now, in illness, that bond had surfaced again. Unbidden, unforgotten, Clara stepped forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Elias, what do you want to do?" He turned to her, eyes raw. "I don't know if I have the right to be here when she arrives." "You're already here," Clara said firmly. "And whether you like it or not, your story isn't finished with hers. Not while this house still holds your ghosts." A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of embers. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Eleanor moved toward the hallway, pausing at the threshold. "There's a room upstairs, the blue one. It was yours once. The key's still under the mat. If you need to, remember who you were before the world made you forget." Then she disappeared into the dim corridor, leaving them alone with the storm and the silence. Clara reached out and touched Elias's arm. "Go, before she gets here. Face it, not as the Tycoon, not as the ex-husband, but as the man who once loved her enough to marry her in this very garden." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. With heavy steps, he climbed the creaking staircase, each tread echoing like a heartbeat counting down. The blue room hadn't changed. The same navy curtains, the same oak desk where he'd written letters to Isadora during business trips, the same window overlooking the rose arbor where they'd exchanged vows beneath a canopy of wisteria. He ran his hand over the quilt on the bed, still stitched with the Whitmore crest, still smelling faintly of lavender. On the nightstand sat a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside lay a dried sprig of lavender tied with ribbon and a wedding band. His breath hitched. He hadn't realized he'd kept it, or that she'd left it behind. Downstairs, the front door burst open with a gust of wind and rain. Voices, urgent, worried, filled the hall. Footsteps rushed past the stairs. "She's here." Elias closed his eyes, clutching the ring in his palm like an anchor. Minutes later, soft knocks came at the door. "Elias!" It was Clara. "She's with her parents now, but she asked if you were still here." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw her silhouette in the foyer. Taller than he remembered, hair damp from the storm, coat soaked, but posture unbent. Strong, whole, not broken, not waiting, just present. "I can't go down there yet," he whispered. "That's all right," Clara said from the doorway, her voice kind. "But don't hide forever. Some wounds only heal when you stop pretending they don't exist." She left him alone again, alone with the storm, alone with the ring, alone with the truth he'd spent years outrunning. And somewhere below, in the heart of the house that had once been their home, Isadora Whitmore stood in the hallway, staring up the stairs, knowing exactly which room he'd gone to, because some memories don't fade. They wait, patiently. Elias stood by the window, still clutching the ring, his reflection ghostly in the rain-smeared glass. He hadn't moved since Clara left. He didn't dare. Then a sound. Not thunder, not footsteps. On piano notes. Single, clear, haunting. It came from the parlor below. The same grand piano Isadora used to play late at night when sleep wouldn't come. The same one she'd once told him sings when the house is sad. His heart stopped. She was playing their song. The Chopin nocturne he'd heard her practice 100 times. The one she played the night before their wedding. Fingers trembling with joy and fear. He turned slowly, drawn like a moth to flame. And there, in the doorway, stood Isadora. She hadn't knocked, hadn't called out. She simply appeared, as if the house itself had summoned her. Her coat was gone now, her hair loose around her shoulders, damp at the ends. Her eyes, deep green, like moss after rain, met his without flinching. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm raged outside. The fire crackled downstairs. And between them stretched 10 years of silence, regret, and unspoken love. "You kept it," she said finally, her voice low, steady, but not cold, never cold. Elias looked down at the ring in his palm. "I couldn't throw it away, even when I told myself I should." She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The scent of rain and earth clung to her, familiar and achingly distant. "I heard you were here," she said, walking toward the window, stopping just a few feet away. "With someone." "Clara," he said quickly. "She's a friend. Nothing more." Isadora didn't look at him. She gazed out at the storm, arms crossed lightly over her chest. "You always did bring people here when you were running. From your father's expectations, from boardroom betrayals, from your own guilt." "I'm not running this time," he said, voice rough. "Aren't you?" She turned then, and her eyes pierced through him. "Because the Elias I knew never stayed long enough to face what he'd broken." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "I tried to call you," he whispered, "after the divorce, 100 times. I'd pick up the phone and hang up before it rang." "Why?" "Because I was ashamed." His voice cracked. "Because I realized too late that I'd traded the only real thing I ever had for a life that glittered but didn't glow." Isadora's expression softened, just slightly. A flicker of pain crossed her face. Old, but not healed. "You think I didn't feel that too?" she said quietly. "I blamed myself for years. Thought if I'd been quieter, more patient, less demanding of your presence, you might have stayed." "You didn't need to change," Elias said fiercely. "I did, and I didn't." Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of grief, yes, but also of recognition. Of two people seeing each other clearly for the first time in a decade. Downstairs, a door opened. Eleanor's voice floated up. "Isadora? Mom's asking for you." Isadora nodded, but didn't move yet. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, Elias saw not the woman he'd lost, but the woman she'd become. Resilient, grounded, whole without him. "I'm not here to rekindle anything," she said gently. "I'm here for my mother, for my family, but I won't pretend it doesn't hurt to see you in this house again. Not because I still love you the way I did, but because I remember how much I wanted you to stay." Elias's throat tightened. "I wish I had." She gave a small, sad smile. "Wishing doesn't rebuild what's fallen. Only showing up does." Then, before he could respond, she turned to leave. But at the door, she paused. "One more thing," she said without looking back. "Clara seems kind. Don't use her as a shield. If you're here to heal, do it honestly. Or leave." And with that, she was gone. Elias sank onto the edge of the bed, the ring still warm in his hand. Outside, the rain began to ease, just slightly, as if the sky too had exhaled. He hadn't expected forgiveness. He hadn't even asked for it. But in her eyes, he'd seen something far more terrifying. The quiet certainty that she no longer needed him to be whole. Despoken, each one precise, measured, and devastating in its clarity. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't wept. And that was what undid him most. He barely heard the knock. "Elias!" Clara's voice was soft, tentative, as if she sensed the fragility of the moment. He didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. She stepped in, holding 2 mugs of tea, steam curling into the dim light. She set one on the nightstand and sat beside him, not too close, not too far. Just enough to say, "I'm here, but I won't force you to speak." "You saw her," Clara said after a while. He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "She's different, stronger, whole." The word came out like a confession. "She doesn't need me, not even to hate me." Clara wrapped her hands around her mug, watching him. "And how do you feel about that?" He finally looked at her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes startled even himself. Like I've been standing in the wrong room for 10 years. A silence settled between them, filled only by the distant patter of rain on the roof and the low murmur of voices downstairs, Isadora's calm tones mingling with Eleanor's. Clara took a slow breath. You know, I came with you thinking I was helping you escape. But now I see you weren't running from your life. You were running toward something you lost long ago. And I was just along for the ride. Elias turned to her, guilt tightening his chest. Clara, I never meant for you to feel like an afterthought. You're not cruel, Elias, she said gently. But you are distracted. By ghosts, by regrets. And as long as you're looking backward, you can't truly see anyone in front of you, including me. He swallowed hard. Do you regret coming? She smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. No, because now I understand why you carry so much silence. But I also understand that my place isn't here, not in this story. This house, it belongs to her, to your past, and maybe, if you're brave enough, to your future. Before he could respond, thunder rumbled again, deeper this time, and the lights flickered once, twice, then stayed on. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the house. The storm was passing. Clara stood, brushing a stray hair from her face. The roads will be passable by morning. I'll leave at first light. Elias shot to his feet. You don't have to go. I do, she said softly. Not because I'm angry, but because love, real love, doesn't ask someone to choose between their healing and your company. If you're going to stay and face what's here, you need to do it alone. He wanted to argue, to beg her to stay just one more day, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't leaving him. She was giving him space to become someone worth staying for. Downstairs, a door opened. Footsteps approached the base of the stairs, light, deliberate. Isadora's. Clara glanced toward the hallway, then back at Elias. Go talk to her. Not as the man who left, but as the man who finally came back. Then she squeezed his arm, briefly, tenderly, and walked out, closing the door behind her with a quiet finality. Elias stood there, heart pounding, the ring still warm in his palm. He walked to the window. In the driveway below, Clara's suitcase sat by the porch steps, already packed. She hadn't wasted a moment. He turned and headed for the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight, echoing through the silent house like a heartbeat counting down to something irreversible. When he reached the bottom, Isadora was waiting in the parlor doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She's leaving, he said, voice rough. I know, Isadora replied. She told Eleanor, said you needed room to breathe. She didn't have to go. She chose to. Isadora stepped forward, her gaze steady. Just like I chose to walk away all those years ago. Some people love you enough to let you find your way, even if it means walking out of your life. Elias looked at her, really looked, and saw not resentment but sorrow, and something else. Something like hope, buried deep. The roads are still muddy, he said. It's dangerous to drive now. Isadora studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, then maybe you should stop her. He hesitated. What if I don't want to? Her lips parted slightly in surprise. I don't want her to leave, he continued. But I also don't want to keep using people as anchors while I drift. If I stay, it has to be for the right reasons. Not because I'm afraid to be alone. Isadora's eyes softened. That's the first honest thing you've said since you walked through that gate. Outside, a car engine started soft, reluctant. They both turned toward the window. Clara's sedan rolled slowly down the drive, headlights cutting through the lingering mist. She didn't look back. Elias didn't move to stop her. And in that moment, as the taillights disappeared around the bend, something inside him shifted. Not broke, but bent, like a branch finally yielding to the wind instead of fighting it. Isadora stepped beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of rosemary on her skin. The same oil she used to rub into her hands after gardening. You're staying, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. If you'll let me. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to the east wing, where scaffolding leaned against the old greenhouse. "My father's been trying to repair that glass roof for months," she said. "He says only you ever figured out how to seal it properly." Elias looked at her, hope flickering like a candle in the dark. The air smelled of damp earth, pine, and something faintly sweet, honeysuckle perhaps, or memory. Elias stood on the back porch, sleeves rolled to his elbows, holding a chipped mug of black coffee Eleanor had wordlessly handed him an hour ago. He hadn't slept. Not really, but for the first time in years, exhaustion didn't feel like emptiness. Felt like purpose. Behind him, the screen door creaked. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. "You're up early," Isadora said, stepping onto the porch beside him. She wore worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. No makeup, no pretense, just her. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Kept thinking about the greenhouse roof, the angle of the panes, the sealant we used back then. I think your father's using the wrong type." She smiled faintly. "He is, and he won't admit it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching mist rise from the fields beyond the garden. The distance between them wasn't gone, but it had changed. Less like a wall, more like a bridge under construction. "Clara called me before she left," Isadora said softly. Elias stiffened slightly. "She did. She said you've been carrying everyone else's expectations like armor," Isadora continued, eyes still on the horizon. "And that maybe it's time you took it off." He exhaled slowly. "She sees too much. That's why she left, isn't it? Not because she didn't care, but because she cared enough to let you face this alone." Elias finally looked at her. "Do you think I can?" "Can what?" "Stay. Without running. Without hiding behind work or apologies or someone else's kindness." Isadora turned to him then, her gaze steady, searching. "I don't know. But I do know this, you didn't come back for me. You came back because you finally heard the silence inside yourself. And it scared you." He nodded, throat tight. "It still does." "Good," she said. And there was no cruelty in it. Only truth. "Fear means you're still alive. Complacency would mean you'd given up." A breeze stirred the hem of her shirt. Somewhere in the orchard, a bird called. "Will you help me with the roof today?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "On one condition. Anything. You don't talk about the past. Not yet. Today we fix glass. Tomorrow maybe we fix something else. But not today." Relief, and something deeper, like gratitude, washed over him. "Deal." They walked toward the east wing together, boots crunching on gravel still slick from rain. The old greenhouse stood like a wounded bird. Beautiful, fragile, one wing broken. Sunlight struggled through cracked panes, casting fractured patterns on the stone floor inside. Isadora handed him a roll of weatherproof tape and a putty knife. "Start with the north slope. The leaks are worst there." As he climbed the ladder, she stayed below, sorting tools, occasionally glancing up. Not to check his work, but to see him. The way his brow furrowed in concentration. The way he bit his lip when frustrated. Little things she thought she'd forgotten. Halfway through the morning, he paused, wiping sweat from his temple. "Why did you come back so fast?" he asked suddenly, not looking down. "Your mother's fever. Was it really that bad?" Isadora froze for just a second. Then she set down the hammer she'd been holding. "It was serious," she said carefully. "But I got Eleanor's call, and when she said you were here..." She hesitated. "I needed to see if the man who left was the same one who came back. And..." She met his eyes from below, sunlight catching the green in hers. "I'm still deciding." He held her gaze, heart pounding not from exertion, but from the terrifying hope blooming in his chest. Then, without another word, she picked up a pane of replacement glass and held it up for him. "Here, this one goes in the corner." He descended the ladder just enough to take it from her. Their fingers brushed, briefly, accidentally, and both pulled back as if burned. But neither looked away. In that shared glance, unspoken questions hung in the air. Can we rebuild what broke? Do we even want to? Or is healing enough? The day stretched on, filled with the scrape of metal, the tap of glass, the quiet rhythm of two people learning how to exist in the same space again. Not as lovers, not as strangers, but as souls who once shared a life and now shared a roof, and maybe, just maybe, a future shaped not by regret, but by repair. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the stones beneath their feet, Elias realized something profound. Fatigue of real work. He'd spent hours replacing cracked glass, resealing frames, even repotting seedlings Isadora had left wilting in the corner. She watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but her eyes lingered longer than necessary on the way he handled the fragile stems. Gentle, deliberate, as if remembering how she used to say, "Plants feel your intention. You're better at this than I expected," she said finally. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I used to help you every spring. Before everything got loud." A silence settled, not uncomfortable, but weighted, like the air before rain returns. Isadora stepped inside, running her fingers along the edge of a clay pot filled with lavender. "This was yours," she murmured. "You planted it the week we moved in. Said it reminded you of your grandmother's garden." Elias froze. He hadn't remembered that. But now, the scent, earthy, floral, faintly medicinal, flooded back, bringing with it a memory so vivid it stole his breath. Isadora kneeling in the soil, hair loose, laughing as he fumbled with the trowel, dirt smudged on her cheek. "I forgot," he whispered. "No," she said softly, turning to him. "You just buried it under everything else." He looked away, shame prickling his skin. "I buried a lot of things." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked to a dusty cabinet in the far corner, the one they'd once used to store gardening journals and spare twine. She opened it, pulled out a small leather-bound book, and held it out. "Yours," she said. He took it slowly. His name was etched in faded ink on the cover. Elias Van Doren, Havenbrook Journal, Spring 2013. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were sketches of garden layouts, notes on soil pH, weather patterns, and between the pages, pressed flowers, ticket stubs from weekend drives, even a napkin with Isadora's handwriting. "You promised pancakes. Don't forget." One page near the back caught his eye, a list titled "Reasons I Stay." 1. Her laugh at 6 a.m. when the birds wake her first. 2. The way she hums when she thinks no one's listening. 3. She believes in me even when I don't. He hadn't finished the list. The page ended mid-sentence. His vision blurred. "I found it after you left," Isadora said quietly, voice thick. "I read it every night for a month, wondering why those reasons weren't enough." He closed the journal, clutching it to his chest like a shield or a lifeline. "I didn't leave because they weren't enough," he said, voice raw. "I left because I was too afraid to admit how much they mattered. Success became my excuse. But really, I was terrified that if I stayed still long enough, I'd see how little I deserved you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the tiny scar above her eyebrow from when they'd tripped over a garden hose their first summer here. "Deserving isn't the point, Elias," she said gently. "Love isn't earned like a promotion. It's chosen. Every day." He looked up at her, eyes burning. "Would you choose it again? If you could go back?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached past him and opened a drawer beneath the workbench. From it, she pulled a small wooden box, the same one he'd found upstairs. Inside lay her wedding band, nestled beside his. "I kept mine too," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I wanted you back, but because I couldn't pretend that 10 years of love meant nothing." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak that shaded the greenhouse. A single pane of glass, newly installed, creaked softly in its frame. Elias set the journal down and reached for her hand. Not to pull her close, just to hold it, to feel the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse at her wrist. She let him. For a long moment, they stood there, two people suspended between past and possibility, the scent of lavender and damp earth wrapping around them like a promise. Then, from the house, Eleanor's voice called out, "Isadora! Mom's awake, and she's asking for both of you." Isadora squeezed his hand once, briefly, firmly, before letting go. "Come on," she said. "She'll want to see you working together." He followed her out into the sunlight, the journal tucked under his arm, the weight of memory no longer a burden, but a compass. "You came back," she whispered, her voice thin as parchment but warm as embers. Elias knelt beside the bed, careful not to crowd her. "I did, Mrs. Whitmore." "Eleanor," she corrected gently, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You haven't called me that since you asked my daughter to marry you under the wisteria." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long." She patted his hand with surprising strength. "You're here now. That's what matters." Isadora exchanged a glance with her mother, wordless, full of history, and then stepped back to give them space. But before she could slip away, her mother caught her wrist. "Stay," she murmured. "Both of you." So they sat together, Elias on the edge of the bed, Isadora in the chair beside him, the air thick with unspoken years. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain-washed grass through the open window, mingling with the faint lavender from the sachets on the nightstand. After a while, Mrs. Whitmore drifted into a light sleep, her breathing evening out. The room settled into a hush, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Isadora stood and walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. Elias watched her, the way her shoulders tensed, the way she stared out as if searching for something beyond the trees. "She always believed you'd come back," Isadora said quietly, still facing the glass. "Even when I stopped believing it myself." "I didn't know how," he admitted. "Every time I thought about reaching out, I imagined your face, and I saw disappointment, and I couldn't bear it." She turned then, eyes glistening but dry. "Disappointment wasn't what I felt, Elias. It was grief. For the man I married, the one who used to read poetry to me on stormy nights, who knew the name of every bird in this orchard. That man vanished, and I mourned him like someone who'd died." The word struck deep, but he didn't flinch. "He didn't die. He just got lost. In your own success," she finished softly. "You built an empire, but forgot to build a home." He looked down at his hands, still smudged with dirt from the greenhouse. "I'm trying to remember how." Isadora studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she walked back and sat beside him again, close enough that their knees almost touched. "Eleanor told me what you said yesterday," she began, "about not using Clara as a shield, about wanting to face this honestly." He nodded. "I meant it." "Then tell me the truth," she said, voice low but unwavering. "Why now? Why Havenbrook? Why after all this time?" He met her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't hide behind polished words or practiced calm. "Because I woke up alone in a penthouse worth $20 million, he said, voice rough with emotion, "and realized I had no one to call when my father died. No one to sit with me in silence. No one who knew that I take my tea with 2 sugars and a splash of milk, even though I pretend I don't like sweets. And in that moment, I saw the life I'd built for what it was. Impressive, empty, and utterly lonely." A tear slipped down Isadora's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I missed you too," she whispered. "Not the tycoon, the man who once held my hair back when I was sick, who danced with me in the kitchen at midnight because I couldn't sleep, who cried when our dog died and didn't care who saw." He reached for her hand then, not to pull her toward him, but simply to hold it, palm to palm, fingers interlaced like roots finding each other underground. "I don't expect us to go back," he said, "but if there's even a sliver of space for me here, not as your husband, but as someone who wants to learn how to be present, I'll take it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned her forehead against his for just a breath, a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. Presence isn't a promise you make once, she said softly. It's a choice you make every day, even when it's hard, even when you'd rather run. I know, he whispered. From the bed, Mrs. Whitmore stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at their joined hands, then at their faces, close, vulnerable, honest, and smiled. Good, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Now maybe the house can stop holding its breath. Outside, the wind stilled. The birds returned to the trees. And in that quiet room, filled with the weight of memory and the fragile hope of tomorrow, something long buried began to stir. Not with noise, but with the soft, persistent pulse of healing. Because sometimes, forgiveness doesn't arrive in grand declarations. Sometimes, it arrives in a shared silence. And he'd spent the night replaying their conversation by her mother's bedside. The way her fingers had lingered in his, the quiet honesty in her voice when she said, "Presence is a choice you make every day." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left ajar. And for the first time, he didn't want to walk through it demanding to be welcomed back. He wanted to earn the right to stand on the threshold. A rustle behind him made him turn. Isadora approached along the garden path, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She wore a cream-colored sweater that softened the sharp lines of her shoulders, her hair loose and catching the morning light. She offered him 1 mug without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing again, this time with less hesitation. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, leaning against the old oak beside him. "Too many thoughts. About." She looked out over the fields, steam curling from her cup. "About how strange it is to see you here, working with your hands, listening more than you speak. It's like watching a ghost become real again." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying. I know." She paused, then added softly, "Mom's better this morning. Clearer." She asked about the greenhouse. Said she wants to sit in it again once the repairs are done. "We'll finish it today," he said. "The last pane goes in this afternoon." She nodded, but her gaze remained distant, as if pulled towards something beyond the horizon. Elias studied her profile, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her thumb traced the rim of her mug. "What's wrong?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, "I got a call last night. From Vermont." His stomach tightened. "Your work. My assistant." She turned to him now, eyes searching his. "There's a rare orchid bloom, a species I've been tracking for 3 years. It only opens for 48 hours. If I don't go, the data's lost. Possibly forever." He felt the ground shift beneath him, though he kept his voice steady. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. The fragile piece they'd begun to rebuild suddenly felt as delicate as the glass panes in the greenhouse. "You should go," he said finally, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. "It's important." "It is," she agreed. "But so is this." He looked at her, heart pounding. This, whatever we're doing here." Her voice dropped, raw with vulnerability. "I don't want to disappear again, Elias. Not after finally seeing you, really seeing you, for the first time in years." He set his mug down on the low stone wall and turned to face her fully. "Then don't think of it as leaving. Think of it as trusting that I'll still be here when you get back." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've spent 10 years running from the one place I belonged," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And now that I've found my way back, even if it's just to stand in the garden and fix a roof, I'm not walking away again. Not unless you ask me to." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it. "I won't ask." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently brushed the tear from her skin with his thumb. The contact sent a current through him, warm, electric, terrifyingly real. "I'll keep working on the greenhouse," he said softly. "And I'll check on your mother. And I'll wait." "For what?" she whispered. "For you to decide if there's room for me in your life, not as the man I was, but as the one I'm trying to become." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek for just a moment. "That man," she said, voice trembling, "is already here." They stood like that for a long while, foreheads nearly touching, breaths sinking with the rhythm of the waking earth around them. The sun climbed higher, warming their skin, casting their joined shadows long across the dewy grass. And in that quiet moment, suspended between departure and return, between past and possibility, neither spoke of love. They didn't need to, because sometimes the most powerful promises aren't spoken in vows, but in the quiet courage of showing up and staying. Eleanor appeared beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "She'll come back," she said without looking at him. "You sound sure." "I am." Eleanor handed him a mug. "Isadora doesn't run. She returns. Always has." Elias took a slow sip, the warmth doing little to ease the hollow ache in his chest. "What if this time is different? Then you'll have to decide if you're staying for her or for yourself." The words struck deeper than he expected. He watched as Isadora closed the trunk and turned toward the porch. Her eyes found his immediately, steady, searching, full of something too complex to name. She walked up the steps slowly, stopping just an arm's length away. "I packed your journal," she said quietly. "The one from the greenhouse. I thought you might want it while I'm gone." He nodded. "Thank you." A breeze stirred the hem of her coat. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. "I'll be back in 3 days," she said. "Maybe 4, if the weather shifts." "I'll be here," he replied, voice low but firm. She studied him for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key, old, tarnished, tied to a faded blue ribbon. "This opens the east attic," she said, placing it in his palm. "There are boxes up there. Letters, photos, things we never sorted after the divorce. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, but I couldn't look at them either." He closed his fingers around the key. Felt heavy, sacred. "Why give it to me now?" "Because if you're really staying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "then you should know everything, not just the parts that make you look noble." Their eyes held, and in that silence, Elias saw not accusation, but trust. Fragile, fierce, unearned but offered anyway. "I won't hide from it," he promised. She gave a small nod, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Briefly, tightly. He froze for half a second before returning the embrace, breathing in the scent of her hair. Lavender, rain, and something uniquely her. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Don't fix the whole house while I'm gone," she said, trying for lightness. "Leave something for me to do." He managed a faint smile. "I'll leave the stubbornest pane cracked." She laughed, a soft, breathy sound that unraveled something tight in his chest. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. The engine started with a quiet purr. She rolled down the window, looked at him once more, and mouthed 2 words, "Stay true." And then she was gone, tires crunching softly on the gravel drive, disappearing around the bend where the road dipped into the trees. Elias stood on the porch long after the sound of her car faded, the key burning a hole in his palm. Eleanor touched his shoulder gently. "Go on," she said. "The attic won't sort itself." He climbed the narrow stairs slowly, each step creaking under his weight like a question. At the top, he turned the key in the lock. The door groaned open, releasing a sigh of dust and memory. Sunlight streamed through a single dormer window, illuminating floating moats and stacks of cardboard boxes labeled in Isadora's neat script. "Summer 2012, Italy trip, letters E." His breath caught. He knelt beside the box marked letters E and lifted the flap. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, each addressed to him in her handwriting. None had been opened, because they'd never been sent. He picked up the top one, fingers trembling. The date read, October 3rd, 2015, 6 months after the divorce. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he sat back on his heels, surrounded by the silent echoes of a love that had tried to speak, even when the world had gone quiet. And in that dusty attic, with the ghost of her perfume lingering in the air and the weight of unsent words in his hands. Elias Van Doren finally understood. Couldn't bring himself to tear it open. Not yet. The weight of what might be inside pressed against his ribs. Regrets? Accusations? Pleas, or worse? Love that had lingered long after he'd walked away. A soft knock startled him. Elias! Eleanor's voice floated up the stairs, gentle but insistent. You've been up here for hours. He cleared his throat, voice rough. I'm all right. She appeared in the doorway anyway, holding a tray with tea and a slice of apple cake. The kind Isadora used to bake when storms rolled in. She set it down beside him without comment, then knelt, her eyes falling on the box. Oh, she said softly. She never told me she kept writing. She never sent them, Elias murmured, tracing the curve of Isadora's handwriting with his thumb. Why would she write if she never meant to send them? Eleanor sighed, folding her hands in her lap. Because sometimes you don't write to be heard. You write to survive. He looked at her, confusion and pain tangled in his gaze. What do you mean? When you left, she said carefully. Isadora didn't cry, not at first. She just stopped speaking for days. Then, one morning, I found her at the kitchen table with stacks of paper, writing like her life depended on it. I asked who she was writing to. She said, no one, everyone, him. And then she locked every letter in that box and carried it up here like a secret burial. Elias's chest tightened. All these years, she carried this. She carried you, Eleanor corrected gently, even when you weren't there to carry her. He bowed his head, shame curling hot in his gut. I didn't know. No, she said, not unkindly. You were too busy building a world where feelings were liabilities. He flinched but didn't argue, because it was true. Eleanor stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Don't read them all at once, she advised. These aren't just words, Elias. They're pieces of her heart. Handle them like something alive. After she left, silence returned, but it felt different now. Charged, sacred. With trembling hands, he finally opened the first letter. Elias, it's raining again. The kind of rain that makes the windows weep. I keep expecting to hear your key in the door, your voice calling my name from the hall. But the house is quiet. Too quiet. I made your favorite soup tonight. Left it on the stove until it burned. Couldn't throw it out. It felt like throwing away the last proof that I still knew how to care for you. I hope you're warm somewhere. I hope you're not as lonely as I am. The ink was smudged in one corner. Where a tear had fallen, he realized. His breath hitched. He pressed the page to his chest, eyes burning. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 4 times. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old oak branches against the roof. He reached for the next envelope, November 12, 2015, but paused when his phone buzzed on the floor beside him. A text from Clara. Saw the news. Storm system moving toward Vermont. Roads may close by tomorrow. Be careful. His stomach dropped. He pulled up the weather app. Red warnings pulsed across the map. Flash floods, high winds, possible evacuations near the mountain passes Isadora would have to cross. He stood abruptly, heart hammering. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and ran downstairs, nearly colliding with Eleanor in the hall. Isadora's in Vermont, he said, voice urgent. There's a storm coming. A bad one. Eleanor's face paled. She's at the Black Spruce Reserve. It's remote. No cell service past the ridge. Elias was already pulling on his boots. I'm going. You can't drive through that, Eleanor argued. Not safely. I don't care. He met her eyes, desperation sharpening his voice. If something happens to her, and I stayed here reading letters while she was in danger. He couldn't finish. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, take the truck. It handles mud better. And Elias, he paused at the door. Don't go to save her, she said. Go because you finally see that her life matters more than your guilt. He nodded once, jaw tight, and stepped out into the gathering dusk. Rain had already begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windshield as he sped down the winding country road. Every mile felt like a prayer. Every turn, a reckoning. He wasn't driving to fix the past. He wasn't even driving to win her back. He was driving because, for the first time, he understood. Love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up, even when the sky is falling, and saying, "I'm here, however you need me, however long it takes." And as lightning split the horizon ahead, Elias pressed the accelerator, CK ribbon of asphalt ahead. The GPS had lost signal miles ago. Now he navigated by memory and desperation. He called the Black Spruce Reserve 3 times. No answer. He'd tried Isadora's phone. Straight to voicemail. Every mile marker felt like a countdown. Then headlights. Flashing. A state patrol vehicle blocking the road ahead. Amber lights slicing through the storm. Elias pulled over, heart pounding. An officer in a soaked yellow slicker approached. Flashlight cutting through the downpour. "Roads closed past this point," the officer shouted over the wind. "Mudslide took out the bridge near mile 7. Nobody's getting through tonight." Elias rolled down his window, rain stinging his face. "I need to get to Black Spruce. There's someone up there. Alone." The officer frowned. "Reserve's been evacuated. Staff left at noon." Relief flooded him, brief, blinding, until the officer added, "Except one researcher. Said she had to secure some specimens before the storm hit. Refused to leave." Elias's blood ran cold. "Isadora Whitmore?" The officer checked his clipboard. "Yeah, that's her." "She's still up there?" Elias's voice cracked. "Last we heard, yes, but the access roads washed out. We're waiting for daylight and heavy equipment." Elias didn't hesitate. He threw the truck into park, grabbed his raincoat, and stepped into the storm. "Sir, you can't," the officer called after him. "I'm not leaving her," Elias shouted back, already walking toward the dark tree line, where the road vanished into mud and mist. He didn't know if he could reach her. He didn't care. For 10 years, he'd let distance grow between them. First in silence, then in pride, then in fear. But tonight, no storm, no landslide, no ghost of his past would keep him from her. The forest swallowed him whole. Branches clawed at his coat. Mud sucked at his boots. Rain soaked through his clothes within minutes, chilling him to the bone. But he pushed forward, guided only by the faint glow of emergency markers along the old trail Isadora once described in one of their late-night talks. "It winds past the creek, then climbs through the hemlocks. You'll know you're close when you hear the waterfall." And then he did. A low, thunderous roar cut through the storm's chaos. The waterfall. He was close. He broke into a run, slipping, stumbling, but never stopping. And then, through the trees, a light. Faint, steady. The research cabin. He burst through the door without knocking, breathless, dripping, half-blind with rain and worry. Isadora stood by a workbench, carefully sealing a glass case around a delicate orchid bloom, her back to the door. She turned slowly, eyes wide with shock. "Elias!" Her voice was barely a whisper. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just stood there, trembling. Not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming reality of her standing safe, alive, in front of him. "You're here," she said, stepping forward. "Why are you here?" "Because the storm," he gasped, still catching his breath. "They said you wouldn't leave. I couldn't let you face this alone." She stared at him, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the wooden floor between them. Then, quietly, "You drove through a mudslide for an orchid?" "No," he said, voice raw. "I drove through a storm for you." Silence stretched, thick with everything they hadn't said in years. She walked closer, stopping just inches away. "You could have died." "So could you," he replied, eyes burning. "And I realized something on that road. If I lost you now, after finally seeing you again, I'd never forgive myself. Not for leaving you before, but for not fighting to stay this time." Tears welled in her eyes, real, unguarded. "I didn't need you to rescue me, Elias." "I know," he whispered. But I needed to try. She reached out, her fingers brushing the wet fabric of his sleeve. Hesitant, then sure. You're freezing. She led him to the wood stove in the corner, knelt, and began stoking the fire. He watched her, the quiet strength in her hands, the way she moved with calm purpose even in chaos. You kept writing to me, he said suddenly, voice soft. All those letters. Why? She paused, poker in hand. Because even when I thought I hated you, I missed you too much to let you go completely. He sank onto a stool, exhaustion crashing over him. I read the first one, the one about the soup. She looked at him, surprised. You found the box. I did. He met her gaze. And I'm going to read every single one. Not to punish myself, but to understand the woman who loved me enough to keep loving me. Even when I wasn't there. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, warmed by firelight and something far more fragile, hope, they sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching flames dance in the grate. No grand declarations. No promises of forever. Just two souls, drenched in rain and regret, finally choosing to stay dry together. And in that moment, as the wind screamed through the trees and the orchid bloomed unseen in its case, Elias knew, through the trees like a weary traveler finally laying down its burden. Elias sat on the rough-hewn bench, steam rising from his damp clothes. His hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of tea Isadora had wordlessly handed him. She sat across from him, knees drawn up, her own mug cradled like something precious. Neither spoke for a long while. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd carried for years, now laid bare by rain and risk and raw, unguarded presence. Then, quietly, she said, You didn't have to come. I know, he replied, voice low. But I needed to. She looked at him then, not with suspicion, not with old wounds flaring, but with a quiet wonder, as if seeing a version of him she'd only dreamed might exist. Why? She asked again, softer this time. After all this time, why now? He set his mug down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the flames. Because I spent 10 years building a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a tomb from within. And when I walked back into Havenbrook, I didn't just see the house we shared. I saw the man I used to be. The one who knew how to listen, who noticed when you were tired, who held your hand during thunderstorms because you hated the sound of lightning cracking the sky. He paused, throat tight. I thought success would fill the hollow places, but it just made them echo louder. Isadora's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands. I used to think you left because I wasn't enough. No, he said fiercely, lifting his head. I left because I was afraid I wasn't enough, that I'd disappoint you, that one day you'd look at me and realize the man you married was just ordinary. So I buried myself in work, in deals, in being untouchable, because it was easier than risking your disappointment. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. I never wanted you to be extraordinary, Elias. I just wanted you to be there. I know that now, he whispered, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to understand. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet pine through the cracks in the window frame. The orchid on the workbench glowed faintly under the lamplight. Its petals unfurled in silent triumph, a miracle preserved against the storm. Isadora stood slowly and walked to the shelf above the sink. She pulled down an old photo album, its leather cover worn soft with time. She sat beside him this time, close enough that their shoulders touched, and opened it to a page near the middle. There they were, younger, sun-drenched, tangled in each other on a blanket beneath the wisteria arbor at Havenbrook. He was laughing, flour dusting his cheek. She was mid-sentence, eyes alight with joy. We were happy, she said, tracing the edge of the photo with her fingertip. Not because everything was perfect, but because we chose each other, even on the messy days. Elias reached out, his finger brushing hers over the image. Can we choose each other again? She turned to him, eyes searching his face as if memorizing every line, every shadow. Not the way we were, she said gently. We're different people now. Wiser. Bruised. Maybe even better. Then let's choose each other as we are, he said, voice thick with emotion. Not to fix the past, but to build something new, with honesty, with patience, with presence. A long silence followed, filled only by the soft hiss of rain, easing into mist. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let the weight of her trust settle into him like sunlight after a long winter. Minutes passed, or hours. Time blurred in the warmth of that small cabin, two souls finally stopping long enough to breathe together. Eventually, she stirred. The roads won't be passable until morning, she murmured. You'll have to stay. He nodded. I'm not going anywhere. She looked up at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Even if I ask you to? Especially then, he said softly. Because this time, I'm staying not because I'm afraid to leave, but because I finally know where I belong. Outside, the last drops of rain fell like blessings on the earth. Inside, the fire burned low, and in the quiet heart of the storm's aftermath, something fragile and beautiful began to open walls in soft gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, glistening with dew and possibility. Elias stirred first, stiff from sleeping upright on the bench, his coat draped over him like a shield. He turned slowly, and there she was. Isadora sat by the window, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the mist rise off the forest floor. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were tired, but clear, present. You stayed, she said without looking at him. I told you I would, he replied, voice rough with sleep. She finally turned, and in her gaze he saw something new. Not just warmth, but resolve. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about choosing each other as we are. He sat up straighter, heart quickening. And, she stood, walked to the workbench and picked up the orchid case. The bloom was still open, rare, luminous, defiantly alive. This flower only lasts 2 days. But because someone stayed through the storm to protect it, it got its moment to shine. She set the case down and faced him fully. I don't want to waste mine. Elias rose slowly, stepping toward her. What are you saying? I'm saying. She took a breath, as if steadying herself against a tide of old fears. I'm not asking you to be the man you were, and I'm not promising to be the woman I once was. But if you're willing to walk forward, not backward, with honesty, with patience, then yes, I choose you. Again. The words landed like sunlight breaking through clouds. Warm, sudden, overwhelming. He didn't kiss her, didn't sweep her into his arms. Instead, he reached for her hand, turned it gently, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. A gesture of reverence, not possession. I'll spend every day earning that choice, he whispered. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. Good, because I won't settle for less than your whole self this time. They packed in silence, working side by side, rolling sleeping mats, securing specimens, wiping down surfaces. There was no rush, no performative urgency, just the quiet rhythm of two people who had finally stopped running. As they stepped outside, the morning air crisp and sweet, Elias paused at the truck door. What happens when we get back to Havenbrook? Isadora looked toward the distant ridge where the road began its descent. We keep showing up. For my parents. For the house. For each other. One day at a time. And the letters? He asked softly. The ones you never sent? She met his eyes. Read them. All of them. Not to punish yourself, but to understand how love endures, even when it's silent. He nodded, opening the passenger door for her. She hesitated before getting in. One more thing, she said. No more penthouses. No more disappearing into boardrooms for weeks. If you're in my life, Elias, you're in it. Fully. I'm done building empires, he said, sincerity ringing in every word. I want to build a home. She studied him for a long moment, then climbed in, a small, hopeful smile playing at her lips. The drive back was slow, the road still slick with mud, fallen branches littering the shoulders. But neither minded. They rolled the windows down, letting the pine-scented air fill the cab. At one point, Isadora reached across the console and laced her fingers through his. He didn't speak, just held on, tighter than necessary, as if afraid she might vanish like mist in the sun. But she didn't. Hours later, Havenbrook appeared on the horizon, its white clapboard glowing in the afternoon light, smoke curling from the chimney, the greenhouse gleaming with newly sealed glass. Eleanor stood on the porch, arms crossed, but her eyes softened when she saw them step out of the truck. Together. "You made it," she said simply. "We did," Isadora replied, walking up the steps with Elias beside her. Inside, Mrs. Whitmore was propped up in her favorite chair by the fire, a shawl around her shoulders, a book in her lap. She looked up and smiled. "There you are," she said, as if they'd only stepped out for tea. "I saved you both a slice of pie." Elias knelt beside her chair, taking her frail hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, patting his cheek. "Now that my family's whole again." The words settled over the room like a blessing. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and rose, Elias stood alone on the back porch, watching fireflies blink to life over the garden. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Isadora joined him, handing him a mug of chamomile, 2 sugars, splash of milk. He looked at her, wonder softening every line of his face. "Thank you. For the tea," she teased. "For giving me another chance." She leaned against the railing beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "It's not a second chance, Elias. It's a new beginning, with clearer eyes, stronger hearts." He wrapped an arm around her, and this time, she leaned into him without hesitation. Below them, the land stretched out, familiar, fertile, full of memory and promise. The same earth that had witnessed their wedding now held the seeds of something quieter, deeper. A love rebuilt not on grand illusions, but on daily acts of courage, showing up, speaking truth, staying through the storm. And as the first stars blinked awake above Havenbrook, Elias Van Doren finally understood. At Havenbrook, life unfolded in small, sacred acts. Mornings spent repairing the old stone wall bordering the south pasture, afternoons tending to Isadora's herb garden, evenings reading aloud by the fire while Mrs. Whitmore dozed in her chair with a contented smile. He learned the names of the birds that nested in the eaves. He remembered how to make pancakes just the way Isadora liked them, crisp at the edges, golden in the center. And he listened, really listened, when Eleanor spoke about her fears for their aging parents, or when Mr. Whitmore, frail but sharp-eyed, told stories of the land's history over cups of strong black tea. One afternoon, as golden light slanted through the library windows, Isadora found him sitting cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by open boxes of old photographs and letters, the ones from the attic. He looked up when she entered, eyes tender with something unreadable. "I finished them," he said softly. "All the letters." She sat beside him, not touching, just present. "And," he picked up one envelope, worn soft at the edges. "You wrote that you used to set 2 places at the table for months after I left. Just in case I came back." Her breath caught. "I did. Why didn't you tell me any of this?" he asked, voice thick. "All those years, I thought you'd moved on completely, that I was just a footnote in your life." She turned to him, sunlight catching the green in her eyes. "Because pride is a strange thing, Elias. It makes you believe that if you don't show your pain, it doesn't exist. And I didn't want you to think I was waiting. I wasn't. But I also couldn't pretend you never mattered." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You were never a footnote. You were the whole story I was too blind to read." A silence settled between them, warm and deep. Then, quietly, she said, "Do you regret it? The divorce?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at their joined hands, then out the window, at the orchard where they'd once walked hand in hand, laughing about nothing and everything. "No," he said finally, "not because it wasn't painful, but because we needed to break apart to see who we really were. You became stronger without me, and I had to lose everything to realize what I truly valued. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We both failed each other in different ways. You with your absence, me with my silence. But maybe, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair, that's how we learn to love better the second time. Not perfectly, but honestly. Later that evening, as they walked the perimeter of the property under a sky dusted with stars, Isadora stopped near the old wisteria arbor, the place where he'd proposed, where they'd married beneath cascading purple blooms. It's almost time for it to flower again, she said, running her fingers along the gnarled wood. Elias stood behind her, arms loosely around her waist, chin resting on her head. Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if I'd stayed? Every day, she admitted. But I don't dwell on it anymore, because the man who left wasn't ready to love me the way I needed. And the man holding me now is. He closed his eyes, holding her tighter. I'm not promising I won't mess up again, but I promise I'll always come back. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. She turned in his arms then, looking up at him with a quiet intensity that made his heart stutter. Then let's stop talking about the past. Let's start building something new. Right here, on this land that remembers us. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. What do you want to build? She smiled, a real radiant smile that reached her eyes. A home, not just a house. A place where people feel seen, where stories are shared, where healing happens quietly, over tea and garden soil and mended fences. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his gaze. Havenbrook isn't just yours, or mine. It's ours to steward. Yes, she whispered. Together. Above them, an owl called from the woods. The wind rustled through the leaves like a sigh of approval. And in that moment, beneath the vast, starlit sky, Elias Van Doren didn't feel like a tycoon, or an ex-husband, or a man seeking redemption. He felt like himself, finally whole, finally home. Because sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't in grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It's in the quiet decision to stay, to listen, to plant new seeds in the same soil where old hearts once broke. Eleanor mended fences and spent afternoons in the greenhouse with Isadora, learning the names of plants he'd once dismissed as just greenery. He'd even started keeping a new journal, not of business strategies, but of small wonders. April 12th, Isadora laughed when I mistook time for oregano, said I'll never be a proper gardener, kissed me anyway. One morning, as mist curled over the meadow like breath, Elias stood by the old stone well at the edge of the property. The same well where, years ago, he'd promised Isadora he'd build her a life worth staying for. He hadn't kept that promise then. But now, with calloused hands and a quieter soul, he was trying. Isadora found him there, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one without a word, leaning against the mossy stones beside him. You've been quiet all morning, she said. He watched a red-winged blackbird land on a nearby fence post. I was thinking about legacy. She raised an eyebrow. The tycoon finally concerned with something beyond quarterly profits? He smiled faintly. Not legacy like monuments or names on buildings. The kind that lives in people, in soil, in stories passed down over kitchen tables. She studied him, her expression softening. What brought this on? He turned to her, eyes earnest. Your parents built something here. More than land, more than wealth. They built a place where people come to heal. And I realized, I've spent my whole life acquiring things, but I've never given anything that truly mattered. Isadora set her mug down and took his hand. You're giving now. Every day you stay. Every time you choose presence over prestige. But it's not enough, he said, voice low with urgency. I want to do more. To make Havenbrook accessible. Not just a private estate, but a sanctuary. For families, for artists, for anyone who needs space to breathe. Her eyes widened slightly. You mean turn it into a retreat? A community space? Yes. He stepped closer, passion lighting his voice. We could restore the East Wing into guest cottages. Host workshops, gardening, writing, music. Your mother always said this house has healing in its walls. Let's let others feel it too. Isadora was silent for a long moment, looking out over the land that had shaped her. Then slowly she nodded. It's risky. Logistically, financially. I'll handle the funding, he said quickly. Discreetly. No press. No fanfare. Just support. She searched his face. Why? Why pour your resources into this, into us, without expecting recognition? Because, he said, voice thick with emotion. For the first time, I understand that real wealth isn't measured in assets. It's measured in moments like this. Standing beside you, watching the sunrise, knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't look away. You've changed, Elias. I haven't changed, he corrected gently. I've just remembered who I was before the world told me to become someone else. She reached up, cupping his cheek with her palm. Rough from garden work, warm with life. Then let's build it together. Not as exes, not as ghosts of who we were, but as partners. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it to his lips. Partners. Later that afternoon, they gathered the family in the parlor. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore seated side by side on the sofa. Eleanor perched on the armchair, arms crossed but eyes curious. Elias stood by the fireplace, uncharacteristically nervous. I have a proposal, he began. Mrs. Whitmore smiled knowingly. About time. He took a breath. Havenbrook has given me more than I ever gave it. And I'd like to honor that, not by owning it, but by helping it grow into what it was always meant to be. A place of refuge. He outlined the plan: restoration, programming, sustainability. His voice steady, his vision clear. When he finished, silence filled the room. Then Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. You're offering to fund this with no strings? No strings, Elias confirmed. Only one condition. Everyone tensed. That I get to keep working the land, he said, glancing at Isadora. And that I'm allowed to stay, as long as I'm wanted. Isadora's breath caught. Eleanor exchanged a look with her father, then nodded slowly. Mrs. Whitmore reached for her husband's hand, tears in her eyes. Then it's settled, she said softly. Havenbrook isn't just ours anymore. It's yours too. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Elias stood alone on the porch again. But this time, he wasn't waiting for anything. He was simply being present, grateful. Behind him, the door opened. Isadora stepped out, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. You did it, she murmured. You chose to stay, not out of guilt, but out of love. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. I didn't just choose to stay, he whispered. I chose to live. And as the wind rustled through the ancient oaks, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs and yet, but the promise of them lingered in every restored window frame, every newly sanded floorboard. Elias no longer wore suits. His days were measured in sunrises and soil, not stock tickers. He'd grown leaner, quieter, his eyes softer. Less like a man who commanded boardrooms, more like one who listened to the land. One evening, as fireflies blinked above the meadow, he found Isadora sitting on the porch swing, barefoot, sketching designs for the community herb garden in a leather-bound notebook. He sat beside her, the old chains groaning gently under their weight. You're smiling, she said without looking up. Am I? He hadn't even noticed. She finally turned to him, pencil resting on the page. You used to smile with your mouth. Now you smile with your whole face. He chuckled softly. Must be the country air. No, she said, setting the notebook aside. It's because you're not pretending anymore. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the distant chirp of crickets and the creak of the swing. Then, quietly, she asked, Do you ever miss it? The city? The power? He thought, for a long moment, watching the last streaks of sunset bleed into violet. I missed the version of myself I thought I needed to be. But that man was exhausted, hollow. He didn't know how to sit still long enough to hear his own heartbeat. He turned to her, voice dropping. Here, I hear everything. The wind in the wheat. Your breath when you're almost asleep. The way your voice softens when you talk about your mother's roses. That's the music I want to live by now. Isadora's eyes glistened. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. We never talked about us. Not really. Not since Vermont. I know. He squeezed her hand gently. Because I didn't want to assume. And you didn't want to hope too loudly. She nodded, looking down at their joined hands. I used to dream about you coming back. Then I stopped dreaming altogether. Now that you're here, not as the ghost of my husband, but as the man you've become, I don't know what us looks like. Maybe it doesn't need a name, he said softly. Maybe it's enough that we choose each other every morning. That we share coffee, mend fences, argue about whether time belongs in tomato sauce. It does, she interrupted with a small laugh. And sit like this, he finished, watching the world turn without needing to control it. She leaned her head against his shoulder, sighing. I don't want to rekindle what we lost, Elias. That love belonged to different people. I don't either, he admitted. But I do want to build something new with honesty, with space, with the wisdom of all we've lived through. She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly he almost missed it. What if we tried, just being together? Not married, not exes, just partners. In life, in this place. His heart stuttered. You'd stay? Even without promises. I already am, she whispered. Every day I wake up and choose you, not because of what we were, but because of who we are now. He turned toward her, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. Then let's not rush to label it. Let's just live it. One sunrise at a time. She smiled, a real radiant thing, and pressed her forehead to his. One sunrise at a time. Later that night, as moonlight silvered the fields, they walked the perimeter of the property hand in hand, stopping at the old wisteria arbor. The blooms had faded, but new buds were forming, tiny promises of next spring. Isadora stopped beneath the arch, looking up at the tangled branches. Do you remember what you said to me here? He did. Every word. I said I'd give you a life worth staying for. And did you? She asked, turning to him. He looked into her eyes, green, steady, full of hard-won peace, and shook his head. No, but I'm trying to give you something better. A life worth choosing every single day. She rose on her toes and kissed him, not with the desperate hunger of lost lovers, but with the quiet certainty of two souls who had found their way home, not to repeat the past, but to grow a future rooted in truth. And as the summer wind stirred the leaves above them, Havenbrook stood witness, not to a reunion, but to a rebirth. Two people, scarred but whole, choosing to walk forward side by side, not as who they once were, boxed from those who'd heard whispers of this sanctuary taking root. Elias stood in the newly planted community garden, kneeling beside Isadora as they tucked chamomile seedlings into rich, dark soil. His hands were stained with earth, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, his hair tousled by the breeze. He hadn't worn a tie in months. He hadn't missed it once. You're smiling again, Isadora said, brushing dirt from her knee. I can't help it, he replied, glancing toward the main house where Mrs. Whitmore sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the dogwoods. She laughed today, really laughed. Said Eleanor's new jam recipe tastes like regret and blackberries. Isadora chuckled, but her eyes grew thoughtful. She's stronger since you came back. It's not me, he said gently. It's this place. It's finally whole again. She studied him for a long moment, then reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded letter. This came yesterday, from Clara. Elias stilled. He hadn't spoken to Clara since she left, but he'd sent a letter weeks ago, not asking for forgiveness, just thanking her for seeing him clearly when no one else could. He took the envelope slowly. The paper was thick, cream-colored, sealed with a sprig of pressed lavender. Dear Elias, I saw photos of Havenbrook online. The greenhouse restored, the new cottages, the garden bursting with life. And I knew, you didn't just find your way back. You built something beautiful from the wreckage. I'm proud of you, not for the grand gesture, but for the daily choice to stay. P.S. Tell Isadora her orchid research inspired a whole new conservation grant. You two are changing more lives than you know. Clara Elias read it twice, his throat tight. When he looked up, Isadora was watching him, eyes soft. She understood before we did, he murmured. Some people love you enough to let you go, Isadora said, so you can find your way back to yourself. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his own pocket, next to the key to the attic, now worn smooth from handling. Then he turned to her, voice low with emotion. I want to do something quiet, for Havenbrook. What is it? He stood, offering her a hand. She took it, rising beside him. Together they walked past the herb beds, through the